represents California's 66th Assembly District. He supports state funding for homeless services and legislation to build more affordable housing. And he will add to our discussion today on how to fix the underlying causes of homelessness in Los Angeles. And we had him last so he could tell us all about the fixes. So here's Al.
Thank you, Ann. Thank you, Palos, Verdes Democrats. It's great to see everyone. I haven't seen most of you for months now, and I hope everyone is safe and healthy. Thank you for bringing this conversation together, because this is a great conversation, and it's something that I've been dealing with as your South Bay representative for the 6 years that I've served in the state legislature. Lenora started off with a great presentation. I really appreciated how she laid out, many of the arguments that are being raised in the state legislature in terms of how do we address the big picture issues of homelessness and housing supply by increasing the overall supply of housing, with the goal of ultimately making housing more affordable for a greater number of Californians by increasing the supply of housing. I also appreciate Grace's presentation, bringing it more locally to the county and the South Bay levels, so that we have a better idea of what exactly is happening in our community as well as in our region. So I wanted to bring it back to the big picture issues that Lenora raised, but also that have been responded to by some folks like Joan Davidson and others. I scrolled through the photos of people that are on this call, and I recognize many of the people on both sides of the argument, this hot topic of housing and homelessness, especially the housing. That conversation in a lot of ways kind of captures the challenge of dealing with the housing issue in terms of trying to increase the supply of housing in our South Bay communities, where, on the one hand, as a policy matter, I think we all, it makes sense what Lenora was saying about how we need to increase the supply of housing to make it more affordable for people of all income levels, especially if we can do it near public transportation locations or job-rich sites, that we can try to minimize the commutes, try to minimize the traffic, the congestion on the freeways, so that people aren't having to drive all the way from Riverside or San Bernardino to come to work at Northrop or SpaceX or many of the other great job sites in the South Bay. But the challenge, I think it's more of a political issue than a policy issue. I think we can all figure out the what makes sense in terms of policy objectives. Yeah, sure. Why not? Let's build more housing, more high density housing around public transportation locations. I mean, those of us that have lived in the great cities of the world, from our East Coast cities, New York City, Boston, Tokyo, others, and London. We've seen those real life examples of how we can make high density housing work when it's coupled with a great public transportation system. But one of my frustrations, and the reason why I really I've been focusing on trying to extend that Metro Green Line to Torrance is that our public transportation system is so lacking. And so I think that's one of the solutions that we need to keep as part of this bigger picture, that along with housing, we need to raise the issues of public transportation so that we are supporting that increased housing, so that we're not just adding to more traffic and a lower quality of life in our neighborhoods. But I think it was, I forget who it was, maybe it was Joan again, that raised the question that I have to wrestle with as your South Bay representative, which is, how do I support increasing the housing supply while at the same time, trying to preserve the character and preserve the quality of life that we enjoy living in the South Bay. And I think that is at the heart of the challenge that I face, and that many people that are involved in this debate face. How do we approach this in a balanced way that we can increase the housing supply, without changing the character and the quality of life of the neighborhood. And I have to say that, politically speaking, I kind of like what Lenora referenced to in her presentation, but I tend to hear a lot more. I think both Ben would probably agree, but we tend to hear a lot more from the people that are afraid that their lifetime investments in their homes and the quality of life that they enjoy, may feel threatened by this prospect of the state taking away like local zoning authority in order to build more high density housing. And I have a lot of sympathy with toward that. So it's a tough issue. I just wanted to acknowledge the political tension there that is at the heart of this housing challenge. At the state level, I mean, I'll just give a quick overview of some of what we've been doing, and then turn it over to questions. We can have a great debate going on and on about this, but I think the state has been focusing on increasing funding for local efforts that LASA and other great organizations have been doing. PATH, the nonprofits that are building the permanent supportive housing, as well as the emergency shelters. So last year, the state allocated $1 billion to address homelessness. It was a record level. And this year, the governor started off the year with his State of the State speech, focusing exclusively on homelessness. I mean, this was supposed to be the year of homelessness, of fighting homelessness. And then COVID-19 happened, and it's changed turned all of our world and our lives upside down. And so that is a challenge. But we continue to pass bills that is trying to streamline the ability to build more housing, to address some issues of rent control. There was a major bill that we passed last year to try to have some relief for these skyrocketing rents that many people are facing. Again, Lenora made the point earlier that there are so many people that are falling into homelessness who can't keep up with their rents. I mean, that's one of the biggest causes, that even though so much of this money has been well spent in terms of helping people get off the streets and into permanent and supportive housing, that there are more people that outnumber the people that have been helped, that are falling into homelessness because of the ever increasing costs of housing. And of course, on top of that, I mean, we still haven't measured fully the impact of COVID-19 and the dramatic collapse in our economy in terms of the increased number of people that can't keep up with their rents, that are slipping more and more into homelessness. So it's a big issue. It's a complicated issue. I think I talked about the debate over the housing supply. There's ongoing debates about whether there should be a balancing act between a right to a housing versus the obligation to take advantage of existing housing. There's a small percentage, a small minority of the homeless, who do not want to take advantage of existing homeless services because they don't like a lot of the restrictive rules that come with living in some of the housing options that are offered. Should there be should everyone have a right to the housing if they can also be required to take advantage of those services? That is an ongoing debate. So let me stop there. I wanted to also, before I get off, I wanted to acknowledge Aaron Forberger, who is, we just hired Aaron as our field representative to serve the Palos Verdes Peninsula. He is on this Zoom call also. Hey, Aaron, if folks need help, please contact our office, and we are here to serve. So thank you, Ann.
Okay, great. We do have quite a few questions, and Senator Allen, if you can pipe in as well here, because some might associate with you. But we had one I thought was a really good one here from Jackie. Life is changing with COVID. There could be more telecommuting, more businesses going out of business. The bills that the state is passing are not addressing these issues or the requirement that housing really be affordable. There are a lot of vacancies. Should we consider subsidizing people to live in the vacancies that exist?
Well, I think a lot of the measures that were passed like the evictions moratorium is a good example. I mean, that is a recognition that people, especially those that have lost their jobs during this pandemic, we should not see people that cannot keep up with their rents to add to the the existing homeless crisis. So that is a temporary measure to try to keep people in their homes. There are ongoing conversations in terms of what we need to do to continue to support people to stay in their homes. But that's one example of
Okay. And Senator Allen, we did acknowledge that you are championing let me see, where did I have it? With Scott Wiener, you are championing the repeal of Article 34 of the California Constitution. Maybe you wanted to talk about that.
Yeah, well, I don't know how much you guys got into the details, but
we didn't get into the details. Whenever I had this in a pre-meeting with people, so
yeah.
But I thought we could.
The LA Times did a fantastic study of the history of Article 34, and it was put in place basically at a time when, right after World War II, there were attempts by the federal government to work with local governments to get more affordable, subsidized public housing for people. And it was basically put into the Constitution to try to make it easier to block, how you subsidize housing. And so we're trying to get it out. It has, the COVID has really thrown a monkey wrench into our efforts, to be honest. The realtors who had originally, they'd actually been one of the key forces behind putting Article 34 into the Constitution, actually came in support of our efforts to repeal Article 34. So it just shows how far they've gone on this issue. They used to be very protectionist. Now they obviously want more and more housing as much as they possibly can. So our issue now has become, how do we get a campaign together? How do we get financing for a campaign? And where does this fit in the mix of ballot measures that have been, that are slated to go onto the ballot? And we've run in, before COVID, we were full steam ahead. COVID has just created a whole new set of complications, and some of our sponsors want us to wait before putting it on so that they can kind of organize a better campaign. There have been attempts to repeal Article 34 in the past, and they failed. And I think that they don't want to do anything. I think everyone's concerned that if we're going to do it, we really want to make sure we're going to be successful this time around. So that's the challenge right now. If anyone's kind of more wants to talk shop with me offline about the campaign, or if you want to get involved in this effort, send me a little message on the chat, and I'd be happy to connect you in with the folks that we're working with to try to get this thing repealed. But it's needless to say, it's a matter of both bandwidth and then how we get financing. And I saw Connie, we don't have any organized opposition, but groups have, every single time there's been an attempt to take this out of the Constitution, groups have organized to oppose. And it's our strong feeling that we have to have at least a decently financed campaign just to educate people as to what Article 34 was all about. And so this is the challenge.
Okay, we won't get into all because we are running out of time. So we'll put it in our newsletter, the details of Article 34 and how people can help out. I did have one question in terms of how it's written when it talks it was talked earlier by Lenora. When it talks about 2/3 of the majority of the qualified electors of the city, and she had said 2/3. Is that the residents of the city, or is that the board? Is that the
No, the residents. So the idea, so that was the thing. These are projects that have passed.
Oh, okay.
Yeah, the residents. So now what cities have done is they've been trying to get around the rules by putting blanket measures on that authorize all sorts of projects, and sometimes they pass, sometimes they don't. And I think they're increasingly coming under fire legally. So these are projects that actually enjoy the support of the local elected officials. The question is, should any rent subsidization project have to go to a full vote of the electorate in order to be approved? Is that especially when no other form of housing bears that burden?
Okay, so we'll make sure that clarification is there.
Yeah.
And just I'm going to go back to something Grace has put on the chat. So she must have looked up her stats. Homeless count 2019 RPV is 2. PVE Rolling Hills Estates was 0, but Torrance is 226. And I'm sure Redondo Beach is somewhat along that line as well. So she looked up some stats for us. Okay, Carol, do you see other questions you want to raise here for Al, or?
Am I unmuted?
Yes, you are.
Okay. There was a question about Senate Bill 902. I guess it would probably be Ben that could address that.
Yeah. So it's a measure that that permits city governments to really aggressively allow for density and bypass some of the oversight rules that have been in place up until now. And to be real frank with you, I did not vote for the bill. I voted for some of the other housing bills, but I did not support 902. One of my big challenges is that Scott, who as you say, I've got a good working relationship with him on a lot of issues. But I'd asked him. I really thought that they needed to put in place an exemption for very high fire zones. My concern was that we shouldn't be doing anything to try to incentivize further construction deep into very high fire zones. Not even high fire zones, but the very high fire zones. And he wasn't willing to take the amendment. I think he didn't want to put any additional constraints on the bill unless he needed the votes. And ultimately, he didn't need the votes. I said to him, if you need the votes, if you need my vote, let's circle back and have a conversation. But he didn't need my vote, and so I ended up not voting for the bill.
If I may, this is Amy Josephek, and I'm the one who asked that question. And my question was to Ben Allen as well as to Al, because I'm curious to see when it gets to the assembly, how Al is going to be voting on it. It was very disconcerting and disappointing, Ben, to see that you had abstained from a vote as opposed to voting against 902. So many of these measures, we've just spent the last 2 hours talking about the problem with affordable housing. And Senator Wiener is pushing through these massive zoning change laws. But the problem is there is absolutely not only no viability for affordable housing in them, they are filled with loopholes to get rid of affordable housing.
Right.
And so you're abstaining from that does not send a message that you're fighting what the problems are with them, and also having this COVID excuse of having only one committee meeting allows these things to sail through. There is no argument about them, and it is just beyond frustrating. People are just livid about it. And there is, here we've got someone from San Francisco who has no clue what it's like living in the South Bay. He hasn't done such a bang-up job. San Francisco is not exactly doing great. And here he is trying to force this down our throats, and you're going along with it for a fire hazard. And it just is, it's very scary. And I want to know what Al is going to be doing in 2 weeks when they convene in the assembly also.
If you don't mind, I'd love to just give a chance to respond and then pass it over. As you I'm sure an abstention has the effect of a no vote. I understand you wanted something that looks a little stronger. one of the reasons why I was not quite as opposed, it sounds as though you are, to this, is that one of my constant concerns with all of the Scott Wiener bills is that they really do run roughshod over local control. In the case of 902, the ultimate decision is still made by the local city council. So the council, nothing happens under 902 without the full support of the city council or the local elected officials. So from my perspective, at the very least, 902 still had local control. The issue, of course, with SB 50 is that just took away zoning power from, for most of my district, from the local elected officials altogether. And so, part of the challenge here is that SB 50 almost passed. And I think what I'm trying to look for is ways that we can help to release some of the pressure valve that exists in Sacramento with regards to housing production, while not running roughshod over local control. And so in the case of 902, which of course I didn't vote for, so I'm not some big fan of the bill, but at the very least, 902 only would have authorized projects that had the support of the local city council.
Al, we are running out of time, so Al, could you respond? And then I'd like to sum up
Okay.
this.
Well, thank you. I haven't had a chance to delve into the details of SB 902 yet, because it has not come over to the state assembly yet. I believe it just passed out of the state senate and is coming over to my house, the state assembly. And so now that we've taken care of the biggest issue, the budget, this past Friday, I will take a closer look on SB 902. I can say, however, that that's similar to Senator Allen, that I am a big proponent of local control. You can take a look at my voting record. I've voted against or opposed SB 50 and other measures that run roughshod over the ability of mayors and city councils to be able to responsibly plan for development in their communities. I mean, I'm a former Torrance planning commissioner. I recognize the importance of local planning to make sure that all of the issues, whether it's housing, whether it's traffic, whether it's schools and public services, waste management and so forth, that all of those needs can be properly balanced. But at the same time, I want to go back to acknowledging what Lenora was arguing for and pushing for, which is that in the bigger picture, I mean, we do need to address this issue of housing supply, and that's what makes these bills difficult for people like Senator Allen and myself. In that we, on the one hand, we support our local officials and their desire to protect the quality of life that we enjoy here in the South Bay, but on the other hand, in the bigger picture, I mean, whether we're talking about housing affordability, whether we're talking about homelessness, whether we're talking about greenhouse gas emissions and climate change, I mean, there are strong, compelling arguments, in support of building more housing. And so, the ultimate challenge is the balancing act, and I think that balancing act has to be struck on a bill-by-bill, case-by-case basis.
One thing I should also mention is that, for better, for worse, and I think for worse, 902 was put into the pro tem's housing package, and she basically, I mean, I got a little. There were 3 Democrats who did not vote for the measure, and we all got called to the woodshed. The pro tem, is pretty committed to this package. I don't know what's going to happen over the assembly. She doesn't have quite the influence there that she has over the Senate, but there were ramifications even associated with my abstention, which I understand that wasn't strong enough, but even then, there were ramifications for me.
Okay. We have one other item on our agenda. I have seen a question here about the COVID. I know you guys aren't controlling any of it, but I do think, unless you have a comment you would like to make about what's been happening with the uptick in cases, I'd like then to move on. But if you do have a comment, we're open to your comment. you can go.
I just worry that we have, you know, that I mean, I think that we did it. We
We're
were
all worried.
Yeah, right. I mean, we all did such a good job in bending the curve, and then, you know, all this political pressure started coming down the pike. You know, at least in the hotbed of the political pressure in my district on this was from the South Bay. You know, folks who wanted to reopen, and I do worry. I worry that the governor. I think he's trying his best, but I think he was succumbing to pressure to some extent. Now of course he's having to roll back some of the regulations. You might, Connie, I know, posted that they've now decided to close the bars down, and I think it's 6 or 7 counties around the state, and ours is one of them. But you know, this thing is, we're in this for the long haul, and I really do worry that people have, especially younger folks, don't understand how the urgency has not left. I mean, there's not a thing that's changed, except maybe we got some more ventilators and some more ICU capacity, but the epidemiological issues are still very much, are still hanging over our heads like a Damoclean sword. And so I am not pleased with the pace of reopening, and I think we all need to be more careful.
Okay, Al?
Yeah, I just want to add that, you know, obviously, like everyone, I'm very much concerned with the, I just read the LA Times this morning, a 32% increase in COVID-19 hospitalizations in the last 2 weeks, you know, 17% increase in the COVID-19 ICU units. You know, the original principle of science over politics needs to continue to be emphasized. That public health needs to prevail over these political demands to reopen the economy. You know, at the same time, I recognize how difficult it is, you know, for those that can afford to stay home versus those that cannot. I mean, that is, you know, one of the most difficult arguments to deal with. I just want to end on this last note, which is just for your consideration. But I was talking with my political consultant a few weeks ago, and he shared with me some really fascinating polling results. This was, again, a couple weeks ago, and so I'm not sure if the numbers are still holding. But there is such a stark partisan divide between those who prioritize public health versus those who prioritize reopening the economy. And of course, that may not be a surprise to anyone on this call, but you know, it's like we're dealing in alternate universes here. You know, I had to ask my consultant, well, what about you know, senior citizen Republicans, and still yet, you know, the numbers were much more toward personal freedoms and reopening the economy over public health. And so, you know, that is it's a reflection of our larger challenges facing our entire country, right? I mean, we just have such a stark partisan divide. But I think here in California, you know, we started off well. We were leading the country in what I believe was a great example of prioritizing public health above all else. And unfortunately, these surging COVID-19 numbers may you know, have to force us to revisit some of those issues.